Have you ever heard the discourse that's like, Legend of Korra is too Western, that's why I don't like it as much as Avatar? Well, is that a valid criticism? Why would it be valid? That's what I want to talk about today. To my longtime viewers, this video is going to be different from how I usually do things. I'm not going to go through Korra scene by scene to point out cultural references because Korra's, I have no energy for that. Korra's like 4 seasons. So this is going to be more of an opinion piece on this specific common criticism. Korra as a series is a lot more controversial than Avatar, and while I liked Korra, I swear I did, I'm definitely not going to pretend it's a perfect show, especially when it comes to the political writing. But what I worry about with this Korra's too Western criticism is that instead of coming from a place of informed concern, it comes from a place of expecting something Asian-inspired to look a certain way, without really knowing or understanding what Asia was really like in pre-modern time periods. Because for me, when I first watched this show as it was airing, it was pretty clear to me that the creators had simply moved their aesthetic inspiration from like 1800s Asia to early 20th century Asia. Early 20th century China, specifically, is what I saw because I'm Chinese and I have an existing impression of that. I got what the creators were trying to do. For example, let's talk Republic City. While it's true that the creators took influence from like Central Park in New York and the elevated railways in Chicago, and there's a bit of Vancouver there and the mountains in the back, they've also said that they've based it largely on 1920s Shanghai and Hong Kong, and that was recognizable to me. To dismiss Republic City as, oh, this is just New York now, is dismissing the fact that Asia did have so-called world-class cities that were urbanized, industrialized, and culturally diverse in the early 20th century. Shanghai was considered the Paris of the East. It was one of the fashion and cultural capitals of the world, and Korra did a decent job in capturing the atmosphere and the aesthetic. It's true that Shanghai and Hong Kong developed with heavy influence from Western colonizers, but just because the cultural exchange was forced onto the local Asian population, it doesn't mean that they couldn't have made it their own, or that it can't be considered authentically Asian. For example, consider this qipao I'm wearing. It's a result of Western influence, when socialites in Shanghai modified the traditional qipao to be more form-fitting and revealing as a symbol of female liberation. Now, it's considered a form of traditional Chinese dress, even though back then, there were probably like tons of people who were like, ugh, the qipao is so Western now, I don't like it anymore. But these qipao developed in the hands of Chinese women. That makes it Chinese culture. It would be way too simplistic to dismiss it as not authentic, just like it would be way too simplistic to dismiss the aesthetic of Korra as too Western, when if you look at the artist credits, plenty of designs were done by Asians, and there was heavy collaboration with Korean and Japanese studios. Cultures evolve, culture exchanges happen. Plenty of things are resisted against at first for being inauthentic because they come from an outside influence, but over time it gets accepted. Like, even the original traditional qipao would have been considered inauthentic at one point because it came from the Manchu people at the frontier of China, replacing the more traditional Hanfu styles that the Han majority wore. This is why China doesn't have a definitive national dress, by the way. It's way too ethnically diverse, and you can't set any style of Hanfu as the national dress because that will require going back to at least the Ming Dynasty style, which has implications of Han supremacism because it's denying that what Han people actually wore during the almost 300 years of the Qing Dynasty were Manchu-influenced clothing, which would stem from a fundamental unwillingness to accept the Manchu as also Chinese and legitimate Chinese rulers. Some parts of the Hanfu revival movement has some really uncomfortable Han supremacist overtones, actually, so that's why I don't associate with the community. I just like my pretty clothes, thank you. So those are the reasons I never found the look of Korra as a show to be too Western. I actually love the world and art style of Korra a lot more than Avatar because I'm so weak to that 1920s glamour. If you also love the aesthetic, I gotta tell you about June's Journey, the sponsor of this video. It's a free-to-download game about June Parker, a woman who has to investigate her sister's murder. Supposedly done by her sister's husband. But did he really do it? The mystery deepens as June finds out more and more clues to suggest otherwise. You'll have to play the game to find out the truth. It's available as an app on phones and other mobile devices, and also on desktop through Amazon and Facebook. It's a hidden object game, which means you have to spot objects hidden in these glamorous, beautiful 1920s scenes. The art is seriously so gorgeous. And the gameplay is pretty relaxing, but also a surprisingly good exercise for your brain. Since you you have to play each scene multiple times to pass it, and the objects are a little different each time, but there are also some objects that are repeated. I found that it kind of worked like one of those memory games where you flip cards and have to remember which card was in which place. It's a great exercise for my ADHD, actually. I also learned a lot of fancy decorating vocabulary, like candelabrum. I had no idea what that was before this game. And aside from the object finding parts, you also have an estate that you can decorate with pretty stuff. If all of that sounds interesting to you, you can download the game in the link in the description. Anyway, I can only speak to how I interpreted Legend of Korra as a Chinese person, but I thought it was obvious that they were taking inspiration from the Republic of China era. Republic of China, Republic City, it's very on the nose actually. And in case you don't know what the Republic of China era is, let me explain. Yes, mainland China was, at one point, a republic. We tried our hand at democracy. Theoretically. From 1912 to 1949, after the Qing dynasty was overthrown by the Xinhai Revolution in 1911. The Earth King from Avatar is based off the last emperor of China, actually, if you didn't watch my book 2 video. And, disclaimer, I'm about to skip a lot of details because this era was very complicated. But basically, the Republic of China was founded by Sun Yat-sen, a Western-educated scholar who pushed really hard for democracy in China. I'm talking about so many failed revolutions that he was actually in exile in America when he was proclaimed president of the Republic. But he had to almost immediately pass the position to Yuan Shikai, the general who commanded the actual army that made the revolution possible. Then they tried to hold elections for the first time, but Yuan Shikai had the top contender killed and took over Beijing himself and declared himself the next emperor. Which proved to be a big mistake because at that point, the anti-monarchy sentiment was so strong that the move immediately made him extremely unpopular. So Yuan Shikai isn't really considered the last emperor because he was never seen as legitimate. The Chinese people made it very clear that whatever the next model of government would be, they did not want another emperor. But after Yuan Shikai died, no clear leader emerged, and so China shattered into a bunch of regions controlled by local warlords. Sun Yat-sen then went to southern China to establish a base for the Chinese Nationalist Party, or the Kuomintang. To get the Soviet Union's support, it allied with a little baby political party that was the Communist Party of China. But after Sun Yat-sen died in 1925, his successor broke off the alliance and started purging communists. And so the nationalists and the communists went to war with each other, while they were also at war with the various regional warlords. It was just war, non-stop war everywhere until 1937, when the Japanese officially invaded China. The nationalists and the communists looked at each other like, truce, and put aside their differences, kind of, to deal with a much more terrifying force that was the Japanese army slaughtering their way through China. This second united front broke down before they even kicked the Japanese out, and after World War II ended, the nationalists and the communists were like, wow, that was messed up. Anyway, back to the Civil War. Very long and very detailed story short, the communists eventually pushed the nationalists out of mainland China and into Taiwan 3 years later, and that's where this whole two Chinas thing that you might have heard about comes from. The Communist Party of China and the still existing Nationalist Party of China both technically lay claim to both the mainland China and Taiwan. The CCP sees Taiwan as a rogue province, but honestly, Taiwan is functionally independent, and Taiwanese people have developed their own identity at this point, so ugh. Anyway, the point I'm trying to make is that this era of Chinese history was extremely turbulent and full of political intrigue. Old Shanghai and Republic of China media, or Mingguoju, are a very specific and very popular genre in Chinese media, actually. Great shows like Qianfu and Weizhuangzhe. This genre is defined by a lot of action and spying and political factions warring for dominance, and that's clearly what Korra tries to replicate. Which means Korra isn't too Western, right? Well, see, while the old Shanghai look and the Republic of China atmosphere is its own unique Chinese brand of storytelling devices, you can't just airdrop it into the established Avatar world without considering that they developed under the influence of European colonialism. Consider the Qipao again. Why is this considered a more modernized style? Why is Western conflated with modern? Although it was Chinese women who chose to make the change, we can't ignore the role that Western colonial propaganda played in influencing its creation. Chinese people were never ashamed of their culture before Europeans showed up. They even had a superiority complex about it. But then, through brutal military oppression, Europeans shamed Chinese people into believing that their culture was backward and inferior, and that it was a good thing that white people were here to liberate the Chinese women with Western freedom. But this assumes that in Western cultures, women are more free, which is not necessarily the case. There's misogyny in Western cultures as well, just manifested in different ways. China had foot binding, Europe had waist binding. While Europe was looking down on China for misogyny, it didn't allow women to vote or own property, so it's all very subjective. So you can't take inspiration from 20th century Asian aesthetics and history without unpacking how deeply rooted it is in colonialism. In a world without a European cultural equivalent, where did these European aesthetic influences come from? It shouldn't be presented as an inevitability of social development. Nations are not destined to develop European-looking cities managed by democratic leadership. Communities of people are not even destined to become countries as we currently know them. To stay respectful to the era it's taking inspiration from, what Korra the show should have done was to focus more on the lingering effects of the 100-Year War, with citizens of the Earth Kingdom and Water Tribes struggling to reconcile with how Fire Nation imperialism changed the world they knew. Everyone in Korra acts like the war is ancient history or something. There are no lingering conflicts or attitudes toward Fire Nation or Earth Kingdom people because of how the war went down, and I don't find that to be very realistic. The war was only 70 years ago. World War II was 70-something years ago for us, and we still constantly talk about it and live in a world order shaped by it. Even if we were in 1920s China, the first Opium War happened about 80 years before that, and China was definitely still feeling the effects. Isn't it strange that the Fire Nation seems to have been absolved of all responsibility for the war? Did they make amends? Did they have to pay reparations? How did Fire Nation people feel about possible reparation terms? Did they think it was fair? Is there lingering nationalism? Korra the show doesn't really get into this. Republic City's own colonial history is only expanded upon in The Promise, the comic trilogy written by Jing Lun Yan. In it, he based Republic City on Qingdao, a former German colony in China. Republic City was originally Yudao, the oldest Fire Nation colony in the Earth Kingdom. It was a poor backwater village before being handed over to the Fire Nation. Then, because it became a hub of trade and cultural exchange, it also became one of the richest cities in the world. Fortunately, the comics still acknowledge that the Fire Nation settlers have a much higher social status than the Earth Kingdom natives, so it wasn't 100% glamorizing settler colonialism. And after the war ended, Zuko and Earth King Kwei started something called the Harmony Restoration Movement to give all the colonies back to the Earth Kingdom and kick all the colonists back to the Fire Nation. But Yudao didn't want to join back with the Earth Kingdom because it had developed its own sense of identity, and intercultural families had formed and lived there for several generations now, so they couldn't simply kick out all the colonists. This ended up causing a huge clash between Zuko, Kwei, and the locals before it was decided that Yudao should just become independent with elected representatives. Now, this didn't happen in Qingdao. This actually sounds closer to the situation in Hong Kong right now, where it would rather be independent than part of Britain or China, but China wants to assimilate it again to rectify its colonial-era humiliation. Yudao raises some very complex, compelling, and relevant questions about how decolonization should be handled. The problem is, Korra the show doesn't really get into it besides Kuvira using it as a motivation to attack Republic City. I really feel like there should have been a way bigger focus on Earth Kingdom people and how they processed losing the war in the way that they did. I mean, losing the Opium War sent China into a massive cultural identity crisis. In colonized countries, there's always this massive debate between how hard they should hang on to their traditional culture versus how much of foreign influence they should accept to adapt to the changing world. China had the Taiping Rebellion, started by a guy who had a few fever dreams, read a pamphlet by a foreign Christian missionary, and got the idea that he was Jesus' little brother. 20 to 30 million people ended up dying because of his Christian revolution. But then, China also had the Boxer Rebellion, started by people who wanted to kick out all foreign influence. So it's honestly weird to me that even though the Earth Kingdom lost the war, the royal family managed to hang on to power until Zahir off the Earth Queen, who's based off the Empress Dowager Cixi, by the way. Cixi was the de facto ruler of China for basically the whole second half of the 18th century, and she was famous for opposing modernization efforts and spending lavishly while her people were suffering. She's a fitting inspiration to take for a last Earth Queen, though. And it's weird that Mako and Bolin never had to deal with any identity issues, being mixed heritage when visiting the Earth Kingdom, when the world in Avatar was so culturally segregated. It would have been really interesting to show a difference in how they're treated, when Mako is more visibly Fire Nation, while Bolin is more visibly Earth Kingdom. I know the producers probably didn't want to get into potentially controversial identity politics territory, but in the end, this just makes it seem like there's missing nuance to Korra's world building. Why is the conflict in season 1 between benders and non-benders instead? Like, where did that come from? And why doesn't it ever show up again? The conflicts of seasons 2, 3, and 4 are at least more connected. Korra opening the spirit portals at the end of 2 caused Zahir to break free in 3, and Zahir killing the Earth Queen caused Kuvira to rise to power in 4. But my problem with Korra is that it has a very shallow understanding of the political ideologies it tries to discourse about. It kind of feels like at the start of every season, they create the villain by going, hey, let's make a communist villain, or hey, let's make an anarchist villain, instead of digging deep into the world building itself to muse about the kind of anti-establishment sentiments that would arise under the social pressures of the Korra world, while considering the conflicts in the original Avatar. Like, I know that a lot of this has to do with how uncertain the Korra production was, but still. Like, this is just my criticism. For example, personally, I think the first season should have been about how Republic City becomes flooded with Earth Kingdom refugees who are swimming across the canal to escape the instability on the mainland. And then there are a bunch of calls for the abolishment of the Earth Kingdom monarchy, so Zahir could have been the first villain. Then, the season conflict could have been solved in the way that involves considerable violence of benders against non-benders, and that's how anti-bending sentiments then rise up, with Amon being the second villain, and so on. Kay and Skittles has a great video series on how shallow Korra's political understanding is, and how it's especially iffy because it makes strawman arguments against all the political theories that challenge the dominance of the Western capitalist status quo that we live under. I highly recommend their videos, and I agree with their opinion that the writers of Avatar may be good writers, but they wrote themselves into a corner with Korra, because they couldn't imagine society evolving beyond the industrialized, capitalist model that they grew up with in real life. Western-style democracy is frequently presented in Korra as the end goal that solves all problems, even though it's shown that it doesn't. But the show acts like there's literally nothing else we could adopt that would be better than this system that's dominant in real life, which is only dominant across the world because of colonialism. So Korra does have a problem with being too Western, but it's not because Republic City reminds you of New York. It's too Western because its creators can't break free from presenting the modern, Western political and social model as the end goal, and any challenges to it as too extreme or too naive. Though I also have to say that this isn't necessarily a valid criticism when comparing Korra against Avatar the original series. In spite of all the inspirations Avatar took from Asian cultures, which I speculate about in detail in my Avatar videos, Avatar was also a Western-made show. And even when I was a little kid, I could feel it. I never came to Avatar looking for a non-Western perspective. I looked to actual non-Western productions for that. So I don't think Korra necessarily deserves to be criticized more than Avatar for being too Western. Like, why are you looking to a Western production for a non-Western story to begin with? You should be checking out stuff like Farewell My Concubine, a movie that captures the sheer turmoil that Chinese society was going through in the 20th century, or Kung Fu Hustle, a hilarious movie that you have to watch, and that features some of that old Shanghai aesthetic. And there's also the whole genre of Republic of China dramas I mentioned, like Qianfu, 伪装者, and 金粉世家 is good too. But I'm not sure if these have subtitles, so if any of you have your own recommendations, please leave them in the comments. You could read books too, like These Violent Delights by my friend Chloe Gong. This is a New York Times bestseller, and it's a retelling of Romeo and Juliet set in 1920s Shanghai, and it really goes deep into that era. So if you like the aesthetic of Korra, buy this book by my friend Chloe. Anyway, that was my opinion piece. Thank you for watching, and I hope you learned something new. If you want to see more video essays from me, please consider supporting me on Patreon or tipping me on Ko-fi. Shoutouts to my Patreon guardian lions, Benji Sudolcan, Do It Out of Spite, Felix Chaplin, Molly McAllister, Nikolas Coates, and Skye Doto. Finally, again, this video was sponsored by the glamorous 1920s game June's Journey, which you can download for free with a link in the description. Sponsorships help creators keep making content, and therefore, see you next time.